The grand lobby of the King Edward Hotel was a stage that never slept. During the day, it was a symphony of polished chaos, the crisp roll of suitcase wheels over marble, the staccato tap of high heels, the low murmur of 100 conversations, blending with the scent of expensive perfume and fresh coffee. The centerpiece, between two sweeping staircases, was a magnificent, rarely touched grand piano. Its glossy black surface reflected the shimmer of the crystal chandelier above, a silent, elegant ornament waiting for a special event, a wedding or a hired weekend performer. But after 10 o'clock, the music of the day faded. The flood of guests trickled to a stream, then to the occasional drop. The chandelier's brightness was dialed down, casting long, soft shadows that stretched across the empty plush chairs. The lobby transformed into a cavern of quiet echoes, a space between the busy world outside and the private dreams unfolding in the rooms above. This was the hour the night staff preferred, a time to reset, to breathe, to complete their tasks in peaceful rhythm. This was also the hour he arrived. He was a man who seemed built from the same quiet stuff as the late-night lobby itself. Older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a kind, weathered face and hair the color of brushed steel. He wore a simple, dark overcoat that had seen many winters, its wool a little fuzzy at the cuffs. He carried a soft, worn leather bag, not a briefcase, slung over one shoulder. He never approached the front desk. He would simply enter through the side door from the street, as if drawn by an invisible thread, and make his way, with a slow but steady step, directly to the piano. The first night the young concierge on duty noticed him, he felt a flicker of professional alarm. The man wasn't a registered guest. He was sure of it. He watched as the man set his bag down gently beside the piano bench, lifted the fallboard, with a practiced, reverent motion, and settled onto the seat. The concierge, a man in his 20s with a name tag that read Liam, moved to intervene. But before he could take 2 steps, the first notes filled the vast space. It wasn't loud or showy. It was a piece Liam vaguely recognized, something classical and gentle, with a melody that flowed like water. The sound didn't clash with the silence. It married it. It gave the empty lobby a heartbeat. Liam paused, his customer service script dissolving on his tongue. He watched the man's back straight, but not stiff, and his hands. They were old hands with prominent knuckles and veins like gentle rivers under the skin, but they moved over the keys with a fluid, tender certainty. There was no sheet music. The man simply played, his gaze fixed on some middle distance only he could see, his head giving the slightest, unconscious sway with the rhythm. Liam decided not to disturb him. The rules said the piano was for guests, but the hotel also prided itself on being a cornerstone of the city, a place of refuge. There was a profound, unspoken respect in the way the man played. He wasn't seeking attention. He seemed to be having a private conversation with the instrument itself. The man played for exactly 1 hour. When the last note faded, he lowered, his hands to his lap, sat still for a moment in the lingering resonance, then carefully closed the piano lid. He stood, collected his worn bag, gave a small, polite nod in the general direction of the front desk where Liam stood, and walked back out into the night. The next evening, as the clock neared the same hour, Liam found himself glancing toward the door. And there he was, right on time. Same coat, same bag, same quiet journey to the piano bench. This time, he played something different, a jazz standard, Moon River, but slowed down, transformed into a nostalgic lullaby. The notes were so clear and heartfelt, they made the air in the lobby feel different, softer. A hotel guest passing through to the elevator stopped, her phone conversation dying mid-sentence. She listened for a full minute, a small smile touching her lips, before moving on, her steps quieter. Night after night, it became a silent ritual. Liam learned to expect him. He'd even started mentally referring to him as Mr. Ellis, after he'd glimpsed the faded initials, A.E., stitched on the side of the old leather bag. He constructed a quiet story for the man, a retired music teacher, perhaps, or a former choir director. Someone whose life had been full of music, and who now, in his later years, found his orchestra in an empty room, his concert hall in this beautiful transient space. He was a ghost, but a friendly one, whose presence was felt only in the beautiful sound he left behind. One particularly rainy Wednesday, the lobby was especially deserted. Mr. Ellis played a piece that was sad, but not bitter, a slow rolling melody that mirrored the patter of rain against the tall windows. Liam was wiping down the reception desk, half listening, when he saw the night manager, a stern woman, emerge from her office. She stood with her arms crossed, frowning. Liam's heart sank. This was it. The spell would be broken. The manager would enforce the rules, ask the non-guests to leave, and the midnight music would end. He watched as the manager listened, her posture rigid. A minute passed, then another. He saw her shoulders relax, just a fraction. Her crossed arms loosened. She didn't move to interrupt. Instead, she turned and walked silently back into her office, closing the door softly behind her. Even she. It seemed understood that some beauty operated on its own terms, outside of policies and receipts. The man, unaware of this small drama, finished his hour. As he always did, he closed the piano lid, gathered his things, and nodded toward the desk. That night, as he walked out into the damp, shiny streets, Liam did something he never had before. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of their unspoken agreement. Mr. Ellis's eyes, quick and bright, met his for a second, and there might have been the tiniest crinkle of a smile at their corners before he disappeared into the rain and the dark. The piano, once just a fancy piece of furniture, now held a secret life. By day, it was dormant. But as the city quieted and the hour grew late, it became a vessel. It waited for the man in the old coat to return, to wake its strings and give voice to the stories held in his old, graceful hands. And Liam, along with anyone else who happened to drift through the quiet lobby, had front-row seats to a concert no one had bought a ticket for, performed by a man whose name they didn't truly know, for reasons they could only guess at. Was a small, perfect mystery, and it made the late shift something to look forward to. The secret of the midnight piano began to breathe. It was a slow, gentle process, like frost forming on a window pane, barely noticeable until the whole picture has changed. It started with the businessman. He was a regular at the hotel, a man whose face was permanently set in a look of tired concentration. He carried the weight of spreadsheets and quarterly reports in the slump of his shoulders. One Tuesday, after a dinner meeting that had left him wound tight with unresolved arguments, he found he couldn't face the silence of his room. He sank into a high-backed armchair in a shadowed corner of the lobby, intending to just stare at his phone until his mind switched off. That's when Mr. Ellis entered. The businessman barely glanced up, annoyed by the potential intrusion. But then the music started. It wasn't the businessman's kind of music. He preferred classic rock, if he listened to anything at all. Yet, as the first phrases of a Chopin nocturne unfolded a soft, lyrical conversation between the right and left hand, something in him unhitched. The precise, anxious thoughts about profit margins and contract clauses began to blur at the edges. He found himself watching the old man's hands, the calm certainty of their movement. The music felt like a cool cloth on a fevered brow. He didn't know the piece, but he understood its language. It spoke of sadness, yes, but also of a deep, abiding peace. Without realizing it, he let his head fall back against the chair and closed his eyes. For the first time that day, he simply breathed. When the piece ended, he didn't clap. He just sat there, feeling strangely lighter. The next night, After another long day, he found himself in the same chair, waiting. The couple came on a Thursday. They were younger, dressed up for a nice anniversary dinner in the hotel's restaurant. But their evening had soured. A silly comment had spiraled into a quiet, tense argument over dessert. Now, walking back through the lobby, a foot of cold space hung between them. The woman was blinking hard. The man's jaw was clenched. They were about to head to the elevators, to take their upset upstairs to a dark room, when the first chords of Gershwin's "Someone to Watch Over Me" drifted into the space between them. It stopped them both. The melody was so tender, so full of yearning and unspoken care. They hesitated, caught in the sound. The man, sheepish, gestured vaguely to a love seat near a potted fern. "We could sit for a minute?" The woman nodded, not looking at him. They sat, still not touching, the unresolved hurt hanging in the air. But as the old man played, the music did the talking for them. It spoke of connection, of finding your way back. Halfway through the song, the woman's hand, resting on the cushion between them, shifted slightly. The man's little finger brushed against hers. Then, slowly, their hands intertwined. They didn't speak until the song was over. They just listened, together, their shared silence now comfortable instead of charged. When they finally rose to go to their room, they walked close, his arm around her shoulders. Word did not spread in the usual way. There were no announcements, no social media posts. It was a word of mouth passed between weary souls. The night concierge, Liam, began to notice the pattern. The regular businessman was now a fixture in the armchair. A nurse coming off a brutal double shift at the nearby hospital started stopping by for 10 minutes before her long commute home, her stiff shoes tucked under her chair. An elderly guest who often complained of insomnia would come down in her robe and slippers, sitting perfectly still, letting the music wash over her like a medicine. They were an audience, but a strange and silent one. They never clapped loudly, just a soft patter of appreciation if a piece was particularly moving. They never approached the pianist, instinctively understanding that this was not a performance for interaction. They were like people gathering around a fire for its warmth, not to bother the person who lit it. They came for different reasons: loneliness, stress, grief, or just the simple need for beauty, but for that 1 hour, they shared the same space. Bound by the invisible thread of the music. Mr. Ellis, for his part, seemed almost entirely unaware of this growing congregation. He never turned to look. He arrived, played his heart into the keys, and left. Liam wondered if the man even saw the people in the chairs, or if he was so far inside the music that the world outside faded away. Sometimes, when he played something especially joyful, a little smile would touch his lips. Other times, during a sorrowful passage, his shoulders would bow just slightly. He was giving them a window into his own soul, without ever meaning to. One night, he played a piece that was unfamiliar to Liam. It started slow and questioning, a single note searching for its path. Then it grew, building into something powerful and stormy, full of crashing chords and frantic runs that made Liam's heart race. It was anger and struggle given sound. Then, just as suddenly, it broke apart, dissolving into a single, pure, high melody that was so heartbreakingly beautiful, it brought a sudden, unexpected sting to Liam's eyes. He looked around. The businessman was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The nurse had her head bowed. The elderly insomniac had a single tear tracing a line down her wrinkled cheek. In that moment, Liam understood. This wasn't just a retired teacher playing pretty tunes. This was someone speaking a language deeper than words, telling stories of a long life with all its battles and its hard-won moments of grace. The people listening weren't just being entertained. They were being understood. The music recognized their own unspoken struggles and offered, not a solution, but companionship. The lobby had transformed. By day, it was still a grand hotel entrance. But in this late, quiet hour, it became something else, a sanctuary. The polished marble and the expensive artwork were just the shell. The real treasure was the shared, vulnerable humanity that gathered in the dim light, and the unassuming man at the piano who, without saying a single word, made them all feel a little less alone. He played, and in the listening, the scattered people in the shadows became, for a little while, a community. The weekend of the city's annual arts festival always brought a different energy to the King Edward. The usual business travelers were joined by a colorful mix of people, artists with portfolios under their arms, musicians carrying instrument cases, patrons buzzing about gallery openings and concert premieres. The lobby, usually a place of quiet transit, hummed with lively conversations about brushstrokes and symphonies. Late into the evening, on the Thursday night before the festival's big opening, the lobby was particularly full. A group of young string musicians, still buzzing from their rehearsal, laughed near the fireplace. A few well-dressed older couples debated dinner plans. The usual late-night quiet was slower to arrive. Liam, behind the desk, watched the clock. He wondered if the pianist would come. The crowd might scare him off, or a manager might finally decide. A non-guest couldn't command the lobby centerpiece with so many paying customers around. But at the familiar hour, the side door opened, and the man in the worn coat entered. He moved through the bustle like a ghost, people parting for him without even seeming to notice him. He reached the piano, placed his old leather bag down, and opened the lid. The conversation around him didn't stop. A few people glanced over, mildly annoyed at the potential interruption to their talk. Then he began to play. It wasn't one of the gentle, lyrical pieces he often started with. His hands came down in a powerful, rolling wave of sound, the opening of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, but not the way it's often heard in movies or commercials. This was raw, urgent, and breathtakingly complex. The jazzy, clashing chords cut through the lobby chatter like a shockwave. The group of string musicians fell silent mid-sentence, their heads swiveling toward the piano as one. The debating couples stopped talking. Within 20 seconds, the entire bustling lobby had gone still, every person arrested by the sheer force and skill pouring from the instrument. The old man was lost in it. His body moved with the music, leaning into the stormy sections, his fingers a blur during the frantic, spiraling runs. It was a physical performance, full of passion that seemed to burn from some deep inner furnace. This was no background music. This was a story of a city, of struggle and joy, told by someone who had lived it. In the back of the lobby, near the entrance to the hotel's fine dining restaurant, a man stood watching. He was in his late 40s, dressed in smart but comfortable clothes, dark trousers, a well-fitting sweater over a collared shirt. He carried a sleek leather satchel, the kind used by conductors for sheet music. He had been on his way out, but the music had rooted him to the spot. His expression was one of deep, professional interest at first. A good pianist in a hotel lobby was a pleasant surprise. But as the piece unfolded, that interest sharpened into something more intense. His eyes narrowed, not in criticism, but in fierce concentration. He wasn't just listening. He was studying. He watched the pianist's posture, the particular angle of his wrists, the subtle, almost imperceptible dip of his head at a certain difficult transition. A flicker of something like disbelief crossed his face. He took a few slow steps closer, positioning himself partly behind one of the large, leafy potted ferns that dotted the lobby. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of the pianist's profile, his hands, his entire being as he wrestled the magnificent music from the piano. The man with the satchel set his bag down quietly. He pulled out his phone not to record, but to quickly scroll through photos. He zoomed in on an old black-and-white concert program, then a newspaper clipping. His eyes darted between the small screen and the old man at the piano, again and again. The color seemed to drain from his face, replaced by a stunned, almost reverent recognition. He put his phone away slowly, as if in a trance. He moved out from behind the fern, and instead of joining the other listeners who were scattered in chairs, he chose a seat directly behind the piano bench, just 3 meters back. It was an odd place to sit. You couldn't see the pianist's face, only his back and the flying motion of his arms. But for this man, it seemed the only place to be. He sat perfectly still, his hands clasped in his lap, his gaze fixed on the pianist's shoulders. As the rhapsody moved from its explosive opening into its more lyrical, soulful middle section, a profound emotion washed over the observer's face. His eyes grew bright, and he bowed his head for a moment, listening as if to a voice he thought he'd never hear again. Liam noticed him from the desk. This new watcher was different from the others. The regulars listened with gratitude, with relief. This man listened with knowledge, with a kind of painful joy. Liam felt a curious tension knot in his own stomach. Something was about to happen. The air in the lobby, already thick with music, now felt charged with unspoken history. The pianist played on, utterly unaware of the specific storm gathering behind him. He swept into the final thrilling minutes of the piece, the piano ringing under his hands. When he played the final, iconic rising note and let it hang in the silent air before releasing the keys, the effect on the lobby was total. For a few seconds, there was absolute quiet. Then, a wave of genuine, enthusiastic applause broke out, more vigorous than the usual polite patter. The young musicians were clapping hard, their faces alight. The businessman in his usual armchair was smiling, shaking his head in wonder. The old man, as he always did, simply lowered his hands to his lap, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. The spell was over for him. He began to move, preparing to stand, to close the lid, to return to his anonymous life. That was when the man with the satchel stood up. He didn't clap. He took 2 steps forward. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear and trembled with a feeling so strong it cut through the fading applause. "Maestro?" The old man froze. It was a word Liam had never heard applied to him. Sir, maybe, or Mister, never Maestro. The pianist turned slowly on the bench. For the first time, the regular audience saw his full face in the moment after playing. They saw the usual gentle, withdrawn expression break apart. They saw shock, then a flash of something like fear, and finally, a sad, resigned understanding. The wall he kept around himself in this lobby had been breached. The stranger took another step, his own face a mask of awe and disbelief. "It is you," he said, his voice growing stronger, filled with certainty. "Professor Adrian Vance." The name landed in the luxurious lobby like a stone dropped in a still pond. Liam's breath caught. He knew that name. He'd played a recording of Vance playing Beethoven's Emperor Concerto in his music appreciation class in college. The professor had called him one of the great vanished talents of the last 30 years. One of the young string musicians gasped, whispering sharply to her friend, "No way. That's impossible. Vance is a recluse. He disappeared ages ago." The elderly insomniac lady put a hand to her chest, her eyes wide. She remembered, too. She had seen Adrian Vance perform once, a lifetime ago, when his hair was dark and his fame was bright. The man at the piano, Adrian Vance, said nothing. He just looked at the man who had named him, a lifetime of silence in his eyes. The secret he had kept so carefully, the identity he had shed with his fame, was lying bare on the polished marble floor for all to see. The unremarkable man in the old coat was gone. In his place sat a legend, and the lobby held its breath, waiting to understand how such a thing could be. The silence that followed was absolute. It was deeper than the quiet that usually filled the space between pieces. This was a held breath, a suspended moment where the entire story of the lobby seemed to rewrite itself. All eyes were fixed on the two men standing by the piano, the legend on the bench and the man who had unmasked him, the stranger. His own composure cracking with emotion, spoke again, his voice ringing with a clarity that carried to every corner of the room. "I'm sorry, everyone. Please forgive the interruption," he began, not taking his eyes off the pianist. "But you have no idea. You have been listening to. You have been in the presence of Adrian Vance." He turned slightly to include the small, stunned audience. 25 years ago, he was the most celebrated concert pianist of his generation. He played in every great hall in the world. Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, the Concertgebouw. His recordings? They were master classes. They taught us how to listen. He looked back at the old man, his expression one of pure reverence. And then after a personal loss, he just vanished. He walked away from it all. The music world has been searching for him, wondering about him, for decades. He took a step closer, his manner softening. "Professor Vance," he said, the title now clearly one of deep respect. "I studied your recording of the Rachmaninoff concertos at the conservatory. It was my Bible. I copied your phrasing, your touch. I tried for years to understand how you made the piano sound like that, like a human voice, weeping and singing at the same time." He gestured helplessly at the piano. "And to find you here, playing Gershwin with more soul than I've ever heard, I have no words." The old man on the bench, Adrian Vance, had listened with his head slightly bowed. When he finally looked up, the quiet, distant look was gone. In its place was a profound weariness, and also a strange kind of relief, as if a heavy coat he'd worn for years had finally been taken from his shoulders. "Thank you," Vance said, his voice quiet but firm. It was a voice used to silence, but it carried. It was rich and low, like the deeper notes of the piano he played. "You are very kind, and you have a good memory." He offered the slightest nod of acknowledgement. "It was a long time ago. But why here?" The question burst from one of the young string musicians, unable to contain herself. "Why did you stop? Why play for free in a lobby?" Vance turned his gentle gaze toward her. He didn't seem offended. He looked around at the faces of his regular listeners, the businessman, the nurse, the elderly lady, Liam behind the desk. He saw not fame-hungry fans, but the people who had shared his quiet hours. "I didn't stop playing," he said simply. "I stopped performing." The distinction hung in the air. There is a difference. Out there, he gave a small nod toward the grand windows and the city beyond. It was about expectations. Reviews, contracts, a stage so high you couldn't see the people in the front row anymore. It became noise. And after I lost my wife, the music in that world felt empty. It became a reminder of what was gone. He placed a hand on the closed part of the piano lid, a familiar, tender gesture. But the music itself, that never left. It was a friend when I had none. So I played, alone in my apartment, until my neighbors complained. A faint, real smile touched his lips for the first time. Then I found this place. At night, it's quiet. The acoustics in this old lobby. He looked up at the high, ornate ceiling. They are honest. They forgive nothing, but they reward truth. And there was no one here to listen. Or so I thought. He looked directly at the businessman in the armchair. I played for the emptiness. But then I began to feel. Not an audience, but a presence. A sharing of the quiet. I saw people sitting in the dark, listening. Not as critics. Not as paying customers. but as people who maybe needed a place to put their own silence for a while. The nurse, still in her scrubs, wiped a tear from her cheek. I kept coming, Vance continued, his voice growing stronger, because here I could play anything. A silly children's song, a forgotten fragment, a storm of anger, a whisper of grief. No program, no rules, just the music and the night, and the sense that if anyone was listening, they were listening with their heart, not their program notes. That is a gift you cannot buy. The man who had recognized him, the conductor, slowly sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. "They've been asking for you to come back," he said softly. "The festival. There's a gala tomorrow night. They would give anything." Vance shook his head, not with anger, but with a peaceful finality. "No, that stage is not for me anymore. That life is a book I closed." He looked around the lobby, at the marble and the wood and the shadows where his listeners sat. "But this is my stage now. This is where the music is real, because it asks for nothing, and it gives everything." He stood up, and he seemed taller now, not because of fame, but because the burden of hiding was gone. He addressed the small crowd, his people. "You thought you were just passing through, finding a bit of unexpected peace. But you were my audience, the most honest one I've ever had. You listened because you needed to hear, not because you were told to listen. And for that, I thank you." The elderly woman in the robe spoke up, her voice thin but clear. "Will you keep playing, now that we know?" Vance looked at her, and his smile returned, warmer this time. "Knowing a name changes nothing. The music is still the same. I am still the same man who likes this piano at this hour." He glanced at the conductor. "The man you remember, the maestro. He's still gone. I'm just a man who plays the piano. And if you still want to listen to that man, then I will be here." He reached down and picked up his worn leather bag, the one with the initials A.V. He slung it over his shoulder. The ordinary gesture, after such extraordinary revelations, felt grounding. The spell was broken, but a new one was forming. The mystery was solved, but the magic wasn't gone. It was different now. They weren't listening to a stranger anymore. They were listening to Adrian Vance, a man who had chosen them, this quiet corner of the world, over all the applause of the globe. He gave his familiar, polite nod to the room, a nod that now felt historic. Then he turned and walked, not like a ghost, but like a man finally at peace, toward the side door. He didn't disappear into the night as a question mark this time. He left as an answer. The lobby remained silent for a long moment after he left. Then the businessman let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding for years. The young musicians were whispering in excited, hushed tones. The conductor just sat, staring at the piano, a look of bittersweet understanding on his face. Liam, from his post, looked at the gleaming black piano. It was no longer just a piece of furniture, or even the vessel for a nice secret. It was a monument. It was the instrument Adrian Vance had chosen for his return to the world. Not on a stage of red velvet, but on a floor of marble, under the soft light of a hotel chandelier, for an audience of the lonely, the tired, and the lost. And somehow, that felt more important than any concert hall could ever be. The news, as news does, tried to escape the lobby. The young string musicians told their conductor, who told a festival organizer. The conductor who had recognized Vance made a hushed, awestruck phone call. By the next afternoon, whispers swirled through the city's arts circles. "Adrian Vance is here. He's playing piano in a hotel lobby." It sounded like a fanciful rumor, a myth. A few curious souls, journalists and music lovers, drifted into the King Edward that evening, their eyes scanning the grand space with skeptical hope. They found the regulars already there. The businessman had come straight from the office, still in his suit jacket. The nurse had traded her usual chair for one a little closer. The elderly insomniac lady was there, dressed not in her robe, but in a lovely, old-fashioned dress, as if for a proper occasion. Liam was behind the desk, feeling a protective tension. This was their sanctuary. He worried the outside world would spoil it, that the quiet magic would be trampled by excitement. At the usual hour, the side door opened. A ripple went through the new arrivals. But it was just the same man. The same worn coat, the same soft leather bag, the same kind, tired face. He moved through the lobby, now busier than he'd ever seen it, with the same quiet purpose. He didn't look at the new faces. He went straight to the piano. He opened the lid. He sat. He placed his hands on the keys. For a long moment he was still. The lobby was utterly silent, the air thick with expectation. The newcomers leaned forward, waiting for a torrent of virtuosity, a proof of legend. He began to play. But it wasn't a famous concerto or a dazzling showpiece. It was a simple, old folk song, the melody clear and pure as a mountain stream. His touch was so gentle, each note seemed to bloom in the air and fade with a sigh. It was the kind of music that spoke of home, of memory, of quiet, enduring love. The festival people looked confused. This wasn't the fiery genius they'd heard about. This was simple, beautiful, but simple. But the regulars understood. They closed their eyes. They sank into their chairs. This was the music they knew. This was the sound that had met them in their weariness and soothed them. It was the same voice. As the folk song ended, he moved without pause into a gentle jazz waltz, something warm and swinging. Then a passage from a Bach invention, precise and thoughtful like a meditation. He was playing his nightly conversation, just as he always had. He was ignoring the crowd, playing for the piano, for the night, for the heart of the ritual itself. The newcomers started to relax. They stopped looking for a spectacle and began to listen. And in the listening, they found something they hadn't known they were looking for. The young journalist, there for a story, found the tight knot of anxiety in her chest from a looming deadline beginning to loosen. The eager music student, ready to analyze technique, forgot about fingerings and just got lost in the feeling. Halfway through the hour, something shifted in Vance's playing. He started a piece that was familiar to many Beethoven's Für Elise, but transformed. He played it not as a beginner's exercise, but as a profound elegy. The famous notes were slower, filled with a deep personal tenderness, a lifetime of love and loss woven into the simple tune. In the middle, he improvised, weaving in a counter-melody of his own that was so heartbreakingly beautiful the nurse had to cover her mouth. Tears welled in the elderly lady's eyes. She wasn't crying for the music, but with it. The businessman felt a lump in his throat, thinking not of spreadsheets, but of his own father, long gone. In that moment, Adrian Vance wasn't playing for fame or history. He was playing for the human ache in the room, and he was holding it gently in the cradle of his music. When the final note faded, the applause was different. It wasn't the wild cheers of a concert hall. It was a deep, grateful, almost reverent sound. It was the sound of people thanking him not for a show, but for a gift. He stood, as he always did. He faced them. He didn't bow like a performer. He simply looked at them, his eyes scanning the faces, the old friends and the new. He gave that same small, polite nod. Then the conductor from the previous night stepped forward. He wasn't there to ask him to the gala again. He carried something in his hands, a small, elegant wooden plaque. He approached the piano, not Vance, and placed it carefully on the closed part of the lid, near the music stand. For the piano, the conductor said quietly, to Vance and to everyone. So people know what happens here. Vance stepped closer to read it. The words were simple. They weren't his name or dates or accomplishments. They were a sentence, a quote attributed to him from the night before, when he had spoken to his little audience. It read, "*****. The most important stage is the one where you play for the human heart." Vance looked at the plaque for a long time. He reached out and touched the engraved words with his fingertips, a painter touching a finished portrait. He gave a slow, final nod to the conductor, a nod of true understanding. Then he picked up his bag, turned, and walked toward the door. This time, no one tried to stop him. No one asked for an autograph or a picture. They just watched him go, understanding that what they had witnessed was complete. He stepped out into the city night, not as a vanished maestro, but as a man who had finally been found on his own terms. The story didn't end with a grand comeback. The festival gala happened without him, and the world moved on. But in the King Edward Hotel, something permanent had taken root. The plaque remained. Guests would pause and read it, some with curiosity, some with a shrug. But those in the know, the night staff, a few regular travelers, would sometimes point it out. "A famous pianist used to play here at night," they'd say. "He played just for people who needed it, and the piano was never quite the same." During the day, children would plink at it, and the occasional hired musician would play cheerful tunes. But late at night, when the lobby grew quiet, it seemed to hold the memory of the music in its wood and strings. The staff swore the air sometimes still felt different in that corner, calmer. Liam still worked the night shift. He missed the certainty of the old man's arrival, the secret they had shared. But he understood. The music had done its work. It had healed its player, and in doing so, had healed a little piece of everyone who had heard it. Once, about a month later, on a night of particularly cold rain, the side door opened long after midnight. Liam looked up. It was him. The same coat, a little damp. Vance smiled at Liam, a real warm smile. He didn't go to the piano. He just walked to his old spot, placed a hand on the lid right beside the small plaque, and stood there for a minute, as if listening to an echo only he could hear. He gave Liam a wink, turned, and walked back out into the rain. He never played in the lobby again. He didn't need to. The music had been set free. It was in the quiet understanding of the people who had been there, in the story that was passed down in whispers, and in the simple, engraved words on a piano that reminded anyone who bothered to look. The greatest performances aren't about the glory of the performer, but about the quiet connection they make in the dark, when no one is watching, except for the hearts that are listening.